Hey, these are some tips for reading Sag Harbor. Let's start first with plot and characters. First of all, the plot is events that take place in one summer from 1985, the beginning of the summer, to the end of that same summer in 1985. And as Colson Whitehead said in his own video, not a whole heck of a lot happens. This is a slice of life kind of book, and so it'll feel very different than the last book where we saw these monumental events happen in each chapter, where the chapters that were titled the men's names. We saw a character die in every one of those chapters. Nobody dies in this book. Okay, so it's a very different kind of plot. One thing you'll notice, and we'll talk about this when we get to literary aspects, is that it has an episodic structure. And so each chapter is a different episode, and then there are other episodes within. Flashbacks, context, segues, and the narrator, Benji, will tell us, hey, this is kind of a segue, this is kind of, this is context information, but I think it's important for you to know. And then he'll go off kind of on a tangent. So what I'm going to suggest for you is to watch for the present episode of each chapter. What seems to be the organizing event in that particular chapter, try to kind of follow that along to give you grounding so that you know exactly what happens. For example, in the first chapter, the present episode is that this family is going to Sag Harbor. They have left Manhattan in the car early morning before there's any traffic, and they're heading out there. And we hear about that on page 5. And then Benji says, well, this is totally different than the rest of the year. And then he starts talking about Manhattan, right? And he talks about the dudes thinking that he is the son of a diplomat because it's a half a mile from the UN. All of that is in the past. That's a tangent. That's a flashback. That's not part of the present timeline. And in fact, we don't get back to the present timeline until page 17, when he once again says, oh, and my mom is saying, hey, there's no traffic. So we hear about the roller rink party, all of those things that happened really before the main timeline of this narrative. So just be aware of that and watch for that. It gets easier as you keep going. You'll get used to all of the tangents. So let's talk about Benji the narrator. He is in some ways a stand-in for the author Colson Whitehead, who also grew up in Manhattan and spent his summers in Sag Harbor. While Benji doesn't show evidence of becoming a future writer, he is a sharp observer of the world around him, describing his Manhattan and Sag Harbor homes in powerful and always funny ways. He also has a strong desire to classify the world into understandable categories as he seeks to figure out his place, his identity in this world. And then we have his brother, Reggie. He's only 10 months younger than Benji, and they've been treated as a single unit for much of their life. Their mother used to dress them in matching outfits. When people would see one of the brothers, they would automatically ask where the other brother was, as if one couldn't exist without the other. In the summer of 1985, the unit starts to fracture. Reggie doesn't seem to be too concerned, though. He seems absorbed in keeping his feelers white and hanging out with Bobby, whom he works with at Burger King. Then we've got the father and the mother, and I'm not going to include much information about them yet because we simply don't see much of them. We heard a little bit about them as they're driving into Sag Harbor, but we're not going to hear much more. In fact, they don't really become part of the main narrative until page 192. So we'll hang on to that. Know that they are coming. They're part of the book, but we don't hear about them much for a while. Then we have Elena. She is the sister. She comes up once in the book. She is going to come to visit Sag Harbor, and so watch for her. She is an older sister, and she's taking care of Benji and Reggie a lot over the course of their life. But now she's sort of out of the family household, and Benji looks up to her as a role model. The characters that we do hear quite a lot about are the tribe in the beginning of the book. And these are the buddies that Benji has spent his summers with all of his life in Sag Harbor. NP, Bobby, Marcus, Randy, Clive. They're a good time. Enjoy the humor. Take some notes about them as you start reading the book. Okay, let's move on to theme. So we're tracing the same 4 themes in this book as the last book. Coming of age in the margins is the first. Benji is 15. He straddles the border between child and adult, and he looks at the world around him for suitable, authentic models of how to be in the world. He's got a strong desire to transform his insecure, passive, invisible self into a cooler, more assertive, more popular version like his sister did. He sees himself as a work in progress, and he's always watching and observing to learn ways to act in the world. Narrative as a quest for understanding is our second theme. Some of Benji's anxiety as he observes the world around him comes from the fact that he also straddles 2 worlds, being the black and the white worlds. He attends a predominantly white school during the school year and then spends his whole summer in Azurist, a historically black beach resort. He and his friends must negotiate the paradox of being, this is from page 72, black boys with beach houses, as they attempt to imitate the version of black masculinity they hear about in hip-hop music, while at the same time wearing the appropriate mask in front of their parents, especially like Benji's father, who forbids his sons from showing any signs of the quote-unquote streets. How does telling this story help Benji make sense of the world? What other stories work to inform others in the book? And by the end of the book, we'll ask the same question we asked of Jesmyn Ward. What does Benji learn? Dissolving families is the third theme. In 1985, Benji and his brother Reggie are known as the kids with an empty house in Sag Harbor, since their parents rarely come out to Sag Harbor except for a few weekends. Later, we'll see how Benji's anxieties of not quite fitting in are also exacerbated by tensions at home. Benji discusses the epidemic of other families, which is how he refers to families who no longer come to Sag Harbor due to divorce and remarriage. So that idea of dissolving families is also sort of on the horizon, or on the edge of everything that takes place in this book, just like the last one that we read. Our fourth theme is the collective over the individual. And in Sag Harbor, there's a clear sense of boundaries with the black and white enclaves of Sag Harbor, where they're carefully avoiding the same beachfronts at the same time, even though segregation was legally banished decades prior. Benji is looking for more integration. He doesn't want to segregate his mind, his identity in the same way. But at the same time, he has his tribe here. He says on page 7 that it was in Manhattan where they didn't fit. And in Sag Harbor, we fit in here. So this is where he feels comfortable. This is where he can hang out and just be him. And his mom has her tribe there. His dad, to a certain extent, has his tribe there as well. So watch how that tribe functions, how those people work together to value the group over the individual in this book. All right, how about literary aspects? Literary aspects that we're looking at are, starting with narrative voice. You probably notice how different the narrative voice is in this book compared to Jesmyn Ward's Men We Reaped. The I think most obvious difference is the humor, right? From the very first page, Benji is hilarious, and I hope you enjoy his humor because you'll be hearing it a lot. But the first-person narration of the novel plants the reader firmly in Benji's limited point of view. The Benji of 1985 is also being relayed by an adult Ben from a future vantage point. And so we always have this duality of the two Bens, Ben the kid and Ben the writer, the adult, who is reflecting and sort of remembering, reimagining Ben the kid. And so we get a lot of interesting aspects because of that duality and because of the tension that's created between them. The tone, while it's humorous and informal, it's also questioning throughout, always asking questions. Also look for the hyperbolic or exaggerated aspect of the narrative voice. Look for how he talks to you as a reader. Those are called direct addresses to the reader. And I think the first one is on page 6, so you can watch for those. But he will speak directly to you, the reader. He also likes to explicitly foreshadow events to come. And that term might seem antithetical because foreshadowing isn't supposed to be explicit, but it is a thing. And it's often done in a humorous or ironic way, which is how it happens in this book. Watch for how Benji is going to tell us what is going to happen. On page 13, I think, is the first time we see this. He's talking about the roller rink experience, and he describes how he is in a pre-sexual limbo, right, at age 15, and how how this stage, by pages 15 to 16, would be short for some, not for me. And then he goes on to tell us, I took our moment of closeness for granted, talking about roller skating with the girl holding hands. This will be a running theme. And if I had known that that was the most girl contact I was going to have for many years, I would have taken a souvenir. So he lets us know that he's pretty dry in the sexual prowess category right off the bat. How about names and self-identifying markers? Well, our narrator starts the story by explaining that he is no longer Benji, what other people have always called him. He's Ben, right? And then he tells, by the end of that first chapter, his friend NP that he wants to go by Ben instead of Benji because Benji's a little kid's name, he says on page 41, and that changing his name to Ben is one step away from being the child Benji. Also look at all of the self-identifying markers in the book where he's talking about the types of music, the types of shoes he wears, the type, how cool the handshakes have to be, and how you have to know the latest one and the latest slang, and all of those other ways that Benji looks to identify himself to himself partly, but then also to the world around him. What kind of person does he want to be? How does he want to be seen? And what are these identifying markers and why are they so important? So look for that. Another one is pop culture references to the 1980s. As Benji searches for models for his identity, he's informed by a wide range of pop culture influences from the 80s. The Cosby Show has finished its first season in 1985, and it's very popular. It portrays a middle-class family of Black Americans whose lives are a far cry from the street life portrayed in hip-hop, but much closer to Benji's life. And so he'll talk about that. Watch for that. I think the first reference we have to pop culture from the 80s is the pajamas, right? The Star Wars pajamas. And Star Wars will be an ongoing reference, so watch for that. He talks about movies. One of his favorite is Road Warrior. And of course, a lot about music, hip hop, rap, but then also he says that he gets a little bit of flack for the fact that he likes other kind of music. He says at one point, let's just put it out there, I liked the Smiths, right? And so his friends tease him about the kinds of music that he likes, and he's trying to kind of incorporate all of these things. All right, how about the motif of analytical tools? On page 15, Benji says, you can test the universe by asking questions. How many mirrored tiles on disco balls shooting how many pure white streaks across the walls and floors? And it's almost as if he's looking for an equation to figure out how to make sense of this event. In the end of that page, he says he comes up with the number 2. and you'll have to decide if that helps him make sense of that event or any others in it. But watch for other similar equations or other things that he uses to try to navigate adolescence. Things like sentence diagramming. He diagrams all of the put downs on page 52, all the insults. That is especially hilarious to me as an English teacher. Check that out. References to compasses, maps, binoculars. These are all different analytical tools that he uses to try, again, to help figure out his world. All right, episodic structure. I already talked about this a little bit. The book is organized loosely with the beginning of the summer through the end of the summer, but there are many tangents, asides, segues, and various contextualizations in between. It has the feeling of not being planned out, much like a 15-year-old's summer feels not planned out. So look what the names of the chapters are that are given, what episodes are capitalized as important events. He turns them into proper nouns. They're often first introduced without any context, but then Benji backs it up to fill us in. The last thing to look for, of course, is characterization. And just a reminder that when we look at characterization, we're looking at how the author creates a character. Physical details, personality traits, objects that are associated with the character, nicknames, actions, what the character says, what others say about them. Is the character dynamic? Do they change? Or are they static? Do they stay the same? Are good things to look at. All right, I hope this is helpful as you start reading the book.